On the afternoon of November 10, 1943, Hans Lurch, the chief test pilot at Germany's primary Luftwaffe testing facility, walked across the tarmac toward the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The aircraft had been captured 2 weeks earlier and sat like a mockery of German engineering sensibilities. Its large, unwieldy shape earned it the nickname Flying Milk Bottle among German pilots. Lurch had already read the intelligence briefings. American aircraft were crude, mass-produced machines, built by a nation better known for making refrigerators and fighters. The P-47, in particular, was said to embody these qualities: heavy, unsophisticated, relying on brute force over elegant engineering. In contrast, German aircraft like the Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were precision tools of warfare. The P-47 was a sledgehammer, the briefings claimed. However, Lurch was about to discover something that would completely challenge his understanding of engineering philosophy. The Americans hadn't built a crude aircraft. They had built something far more dangerous, a practical one. An aircraft designed not for individual aces, but for armies. An aircraft intended not to break records, but to break enemies through sheer numbers and reliable operational availability. Within 90 minutes, Lurch would sit at his desk and write a report that would be filed and ignored. But history would eventually prove him right. Germany was building fighters for individual excellence, while America was building fighters for industrial war. And in total war, that difference would be decisive. Hans Lurch had been flying since childhood. Born in 1916 in Breslau, he began with gliders in the early 1930s, climbing the ranks through determination despite his family's limited means. When Hitler came to power and Germany secretly rearmed, Lurch found new opportunities. By 1939, he was a test pilot at Rechlin, Germany's equivalent of Britain's Farnborough or the United States Wright Field. Unlike combat pilots who flew one or two aircraft types, Lurch flew everything: new German prototypes, production aircraft, and even captured enemy planes. His logbook would eventually record over 120 different aircraft types. Lurch was also a trained aeronautical engineer, and his reports were known for brutal technical honesty. If an aircraft was inadequate, he said so. If an enemy design was superior, he documented it. This frankness had earned him some enemies among Nazi officials who preferred optimistic assessments, but his expertise was too valuable to ignore. When Hans Lurch spoke about an aircraft, people listened, even if they didn't always like what they heard. The P-47 Thunderbolt sitting on the Rechlin tarmac had an interesting story. Its pilot, Lieutenant William Roach of the 358 Fighter Squadron, 355th Fighter Group, had gotten lost in bad weather during an escort mission on November 7, 1943. His entire flight was running low on fuel. The flight leader crash-landed on a beach, another pilot bailed out over the North Sea, and only Roach made it back to England. Barely. Roach thought he had landed in southern England, but when he got out of the plane, he realized a horrible truth. He had landed at a Luftwaffe base in France. Roach was now a prisoner of war, and his aircraft, nicknamed Beetle, was now German property. The Luftwaffe acted quickly, moving Beetle inland to Rechlin before American or British fighters could destroy it. Now, the aircraft sat, painted in Luftwaffe camouflage with the code T9+FK, the markings of the famous Circus Rosarius demonstration unit. Lurch had heard the dismissive comments from other pilots. The P-47 was a joke, too heavy, too big, too American. It represented everything wrong with American design philosophy: crude, unrefined, relying on massive engines to make up for poor aerodynamics. But Lurch had learned not to trust first impressions. He had flown enough captured Allied aircraft to know that British and American engineers were highly skilled. If they designed an aircraft this way, they had reasons for it. His job was to understand those reasons. As he walked around the P-47, he noted its sheer size. The radial engine was massive, and the fuselage was built around it like a barrel. The landing gear was thick and sturdy. Everything about the aircraft screamed heavy. German fighters were sleek, elegant, designed for agility and performance, but this aircraft looked like it had been built by shipbuilders, not aircraft engineers. Lurch began his inspection. The quality of construction was immediately clear. The welds were clean, the panel gaps were precise, and high-grade materials were used throughout. This wasn't crude manufacturing. This was sophisticated mass production, and there was a difference. The P-47 was built to tolerances at German factories, stretched thin by the war, could no longer consistently achieve. Climbing into the cockpit, Lurch immediately understood why German pilots had complained. The cockpit was enormous compared to the cramped space in a Bf-109. A German pilot, accustomed to his aircraft fitting like a glove, would feel lost in this vast space. But as Lurch settled into the seat, he realized something. This wasn't a flaw, it was a deliberate design choice. In the Bf-109, Lurch had to crouch to avoid banging his head on the canopy. The cockpit was so tight. The instrument access in German aircraft was often difficult, and long missions were physically draining. German engineering emphasized performance, and if pilot comfort was compromised, it was considered acceptable. However, the P-47 cockpit was not only adequate but genuinely comfortable. The seat was well padded, and there was plenty of room to move, stretch, and adjust positions during long flights. The canopy provided excellent visibility, and everything was within easy reach without straining. Lurch began examining the controls and instruments. What stood out was the instrument panel's use of color coding. Red and green sections indicated the acceptable operating ranges for the engine. A pilot could gauge engine status at a glance without having to read the numbers. It made sense now, Lurch realized. According to intelligence reports, American fighter units included pilots from various countries, including Free French, Polish, and others who might not speak English fluently. The color coding allowed any pilot, regardless of language proficiency, to safely operate the aircraft. Green signified good, red signified danger. It was a brilliant design, not from an engineering standpoint, but from an operational perspective. German instruments required pilots to understand precise specifications, but the P-47 was designed so that even pilots with minimal training could operate it safely. This wasn't crude engineering. It was thoughtful, inclusive design that took human factors into account. Lurch continued his inspection. The control layout was intuitive and well organized. The throttle, mixture control, and propeller pitch were grouped together on the left side, and the fuel system controls were clearly labeled. Everything was designed for ease of use. German fighters, like the Bf-109, were made for expert pilots. The 109, in particular, was notorious for being difficult to handle on takeoff and landing due to its narrow landing gear, which often caused ground loops. German training programs produced highly skilled pilots who could master these challenging characteristics. But by late 1943, Germany's training programs were falling apart. With fuel shortages, new pilots received little flight time before being sent into combat. The elaborate training of earlier years was no longer a reality, and Germany now needed aircraft that even novice pilots could fly safely, yet they were still designing planes for aces. Lurch reviewed the pre-flight checklist. The American manual was clear and thorough, with step-by-step instructions. German manuals assumed pilots were experts, but American manuals assumed ignorance and explained everything in detail. Lurch started the engine, and the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp roared to life with its signature sound. And then, something else stood out, something that will become a recurring theme in Lurch's evaluation. The engine ran smoothly, extraordinarily smoothly. He'd flown enough American planes to recognize the pattern. American engines were consistently smooth and reliable. German engines, particularly later in the war, were more temperamental. Manufacturing quality varied from factory to factory, and replacement parts often didn't fit properly. Engines that ran perfectly when new could develop problems after only a short time. The R2800 idled as if it could run forever. No vibration, no rough spots, no concerning noises, just smooth, powerful operation. This was mass production at a level Germany could no longer match. It was one thing to build a perfect engine in a lab, but it was another to build thousands of reliable engines consistently. Lurch received clearance and taxied toward the runway. This was another revelation. The P-47's landing gear was wide and robust. The tail wheel locked into place, keeping the aircraft straight on the ground. Taxiing was easy, visibility was good, and the aircraft felt stable. In a Bf-109, ground handling was a constant challenge. Its narrow landing gear made it unstable, and the poor visibility over the nose meant inexperienced pilots often ground looped during taxiing or landing, damaging the aircraft even without enemy action. The Luftwaffe accepted these challenges in exchange for high performance. But the P-47 was designed to be operated from rough forward airfields by pilots of varying skill levels. Its robust landing gear could absorb hard landings, and its excellent ground handling meant fewer accidents. Lurch would later write in his memoir about forgetting to lock the tail wheel once and nearly ground looping the P-47, but catching it just in time. The fact that he was able to catch it in time, that the aircraft was forgiving enough to correct itself, was something impossible with a Bf-109. Lurch lined up on the runway and advanced the throttle. The acceleration was impressive, with a massive engine propelling the heavy fighter forward with authority. The takeoff run was longer than the German fighters, but not excessively so. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, and Lurch retracted the landing gear. As he climbed to altitude, he tested the handling. The P-47 wasn't agile in the German sense. It didn't turn as tightly or respond as quickly as a Bf-109 or FW-190, but it was stable, predictable, and solid. Lurch experimented with the flaps at a safe altitude. As he had noted in his memoir, the hydraulic system worked smoothly. Everything operated as it should, with no quirks or unexpected behaviors. This was the emerging pattern. The P-47 wasn't the perfect fighter in the conventional sense, but it was reliable and designed for mass production, an approach that German aircraft simply couldn't match at this stage of the war. The P-47 was not the most agile fighter. It wasn't the fastest at low altitude, and it didn't excel in traditional dogfighting. However, it was competent in every area, reliable in all systems, and forgiving of pilot errors. German fighters were like temperamental thoroughbreds. The P-47 was a workhorse, and Lurch was starting to understand that in industrial warfare, workhorses were the key to success. At high altitude, Lurch tested the P-47's performance. Above 15,000 feet, the turbo supercharger came into its element. The aircraft accelerated smoothly and maintained power, while German fighters struggled to operate in the thinner air. The dive performance was impressive, and the roll rate was excellent for such a large aircraft. Lurch flew for about 90 minutes, putting the Thunderbolt through various maneuvers. The aircraft never surprised him negatively. Everything worked as it should. The engine ran flawlessly. The controls remained responsive, and the system stayed functional. It was during this flight that Lurch grasped the deeper truth about the aircraft. The P-47 wasn't designed to be the ultimate fighter. It was designed to be the ultimate operational fighter. There was a significant difference between the two, and Lurch's understanding of this distinction was profound. German engineers designed for peak performance, while American engineers designed for sustained operations. A Bf-109 in perfect condition, flown by an expert pilot, might outperform the P-47 in a dogfight. But how often was a German fighter in perfect condition? How often were pilots experts? How often could mechanics perform the precise maintenance required? The P-47 was designed with the assumption that maintenance would be performed by mechanics of varying skill levels, using parts from different production batches, and under field conditions, possibly even under enemy fire. It was designed assuming pilots might be tired, stressed, wounded, or undertrained. It was designed with the understanding that aircraft would take battle damage and need to keep flying. Once Lurch understood this philosophy, every design decision made sense. The robust construction, the forgiving handling, the intuitive controls, and the reliable engine, all these features served one purpose: operational availability. Lurch returned to Rechlin and landed the P-47. The landing was straightforward, and the sturdy landing gear absorbed the touchdown smoothly. He taxied back to the hangar and shut down the engine. Ground crew members gathered around, eager for his assessment. What did he think of the large, ungainly American fighter? Lurch climbed out and stood for a long moment, looking at the aircraft. Then he said something that surprised them. "It's the best designed operational fighter I've ever flown." The mechanics were confused. Best designed? It was huge, heavy, and inelegant. How could it be well designed? "It's not designed for performance," Lurch explained. "It's designed for operations, and there's a difference." That evening, Lurch sat at his desk, writing his technical report. This was always the most important part of his job. Flying the aircraft was one thing, but understanding what it meant strategically was another. He organized his report into sections: performance, handling, systems, and strategic assessment. In the performance section, he documented the facts objectively. The P-47 was fast at high altitude but slow at low altitude. Its dive performance was excellent, and its turning performance was adequate, but not exceptional. The rate of climb was good, and its high-altitude performance was outstanding, thanks to the turbo supercharger. In the handling section, he noted the stable, predictable characteristics, easy ground handling, forgiving flight behavior, good visibility, and a comfortable cockpit for long-duration missions. In the system section, he detailed the color-coded instruments, the intuitive control layout, the robust construction, and the smooth, reliable engine. But it was in the strategic assessment section that Lurch wrote something that would later prove prophetic. Even though his report would be filed and ignored, he wrote, "The P-47 Thunderbolt represents a fundamentally different design philosophy from German fighters. German aircraft are optimized for peak performance and assume expert pilots and maintenance. The P-47 is optimized for operational reliability and assumes average pilots and field maintenance. This aircraft is designed to be operated in large numbers by pilots of varying skill levels. Its forgiving handling means fewer accidents. The robust construction ensures more aircraft return from missions. The reliable engine means more uptime and less maintenance. The intuitive controls make for faster training. Most importantly, every design decision prioritizes sustained operations over peak performance. The Americans have not built the best fighter. They have built the most operational fighter, and they can produce it in numbers we cannot match." Lurch paused for a moment, thinking about how to phrase his conclusion. He knew it would be controversial, possibly even dangerous, but accuracy was more important than comfort. In his assessment, he wrote, "The P-47 is not crude engineering. It is sophisticated operational engineering. Germany builds fighters for individual excellence. America builds fighters for industrial war. If the Americans can field hundreds of these aircraft, flown by adequately trained pilots, our numerical and qualitative advantages will be negated through sheer operational availability. Recommendation: German fighter design philosophy must incorporate operational reliability as a primary requirement, not a secondary consideration. We cannot win an attrition war against an enemy that can keep more aircraft operational more consistently." He signed the report and submitted it through the proper channels. Lurch's report made its way up the command structure. It was read, discussed, and ultimately filed. The conclusion was dismissed as overly pessimistic. The P-47 was still considered a crude American design. German fighters were deemed superior. End of discussion. However, Lurch's predictions began to materialize almost immediately. By early 1944, P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over Germany in overwhelming numbers. They escorted American bomber formations deep into the Reich and continued to appear day after day, mission after mission. German fighters would intercept them and sometimes shoot them down, but the next day, more P-47s arrived, always more. Luftwaffe pilots reported growing frustration. They would damage P-47s that should have been destroyed, only to watch them return home. They would shoot down one American pilot and encounter a different one flying a new P-47 the next day. The supply of these aircraft seemed endless. Meanwhile, German fighter production was struggling. Allied bombing disrupted factories. Material shortages forced compromises. Quality control suffered as experienced workers were drafted and replaced by forced labor. Aircraft that should have been reliable began to develop problems. Engines failed prematurely. Systems malfunctioned. The operational availability gap continued to widen. The Luftwaffe might have had more aircraft on paper, but few were actually in the air on any given day. American units maintained higher operational readiness because their aircraft were designed for it. Lurch continued his work at Rechlin, flying more captured aircraft and writing more reports. He flew a captured P-51 Mustang and was impressed by its combination of range and performance. He flew Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet fighters. Each evaluation reinforced the same conclusion. Allied aircraft prioritized operational reliability. The P-47 Beetle that Lurch had flown eventually went to Circus Rosarius, a special Luftwaffe demonstration unit. This unit traveled to frontline fighter bases with captured Allied aircraft, showing German pilots what they were facing and how to fight them. Ironically, this meant German pilots got extensive briefings on the strengths and weaknesses of the P-47, but their own aircraft weren't redesigned to match its operational advantages. The war ground on. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was collapsing. Not because German pilots lacked courage or skill, but because their industrial base could no longer sustain operations. Aircraft sat grounded due to a lack of fuel. New pilots received minimal training because there wasn't enough fuel for training flights. Replacement parts were scarce. Everything Lurch had identified as the American advantage, operational sustainability, was absent from the German war effort. Hans Lurch survived the war. His skill as a test pilot and his careful flying meant he never crashed or seriously damaged an aircraft throughout his entire career. This was an extraordinary record, particularly given that he had flown over 120 different types, many of them captured enemy aircraft with no manuals or prior familiarization. After Germany's surrender, Lurch was interrogated by Allied technical intelligence officers. They were fascinated by his experiences flying captured Allied aircraft. They found his reports in German files and asked him about his assessments. You concluded that American aircraft were superior not in performance, but in operational design, an American officer remarked. That's an unusual assessment. Lurch nodded. It was the most important assessment. Your pilots weren't necessarily better than ours. Your aircraft weren't necessarily faster or more maneuverable, but you could keep more aircraft flying consistently. You could train more pilots. You could sustain operations that we couldn't sustain. Was this apparent when you flew the P-47? Immediately, every design decision made sense once I understood the philosophy. You weren't building for dogfighting supremacy. You were building for sustained operations. The comfortable cockpit meant pilots could fly 8-hour missions. The forgiving handling meant fewer accidents. The reliable engine meant less maintenance downtime. The robust construction meant battle-damaged aircraft returned home. Did German leadership understand this? Lurch laughed bitterly. My report was filed. The assessment was that I'd been demoralized by flying the enemy aircraft and lost my objectivity. German engineering was superior. American engineering was crude. That was the official position, and any evidence to the contrary was dismissed. If Germany had adopted American design philosophy, would it have made a difference? Lurch considered the question carefully. By 1943, probably not. Germany's industrial base couldn't match American or Soviet production, regardless of design philosophy. But if we had prioritized operational reliability from the beginning, our fighters would have been more effective throughout the war. We lost many aircraft to accidents, mechanical failures, and maintenance issues that better design could have prevented. The interrogation revealed a pattern. Lurch wasn't the only German engineer who had recognized the Allied engineering advantages. Many others had written reports and made recommendations, but all were ignored because their conclusions contradicted Nazi ideology about German superiority. The final production numbers told the story. The United States produced over 15,600 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war. At peak production, one Thunderbolt rolled off the assembly line every hour. Germany produced around 36,000 single-engine fighters in total across all types during the entire war, with production constantly disrupted by bombing. More crucially, American aircraft maintained high operational readiness rates. A unit with 100 P-47s might have 85 to 90 available for operations on any given day. In contrast, a German unit with 100 fighters might only have 60 or 70 available, with the rest grounded for maintenance, part shortages, or fuel problems. The multiplication of these factors was devastating. More aircraft produced, combined with higher availability rates and better sustainability, resulted in overwhelming numerical superiority at the point of contact. In his later years, Lurch wrote his memoir, Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book provided detailed accounts of his experiences flying everything from B-17 bombers to P-51 fighters. His assessment of the P-47 included technical observations, including his famous comment about the comfortable cockpit compared to the cramped Bf-109. What makes Lurch's story significant isn't just that he flew captured aircraft. Many pilots on both sides did that. What sets his account apart is that he understood what he was observing. As a trained engineer and experienced test pilot, he could evaluate not only whether an aircraft was good or bad, but also why it was designed in a particular way and what it revealed about the underlying industrial philosophy. The P-47 Beetle that Lurch flew in November 1943 represented more than just a captured fighter. It symbolized a completely different approach to warfare. Germany approached World War II as if it was still World War I, where individual excellence and superior technology could win battles. The United States, on the other hand, approached the war as an industrial conflict, where sustained operations and overwhelming numbers would win campaigns. German fighters like the Bf-109 and FW-190 were magnificent machines when they worked perfectly, but that became increasingly rare. Manufacturing quality declined, maintenance became more difficult, parts became scarce, and fuel became harder to obtain. The P-47, however, kept flying. It absorbed damage and still returned home. It could operate from rough fields, be maintained by mechanics with average skills, and be flown safely by pilots with minimal training. And there were always more of them. Lurch immediately recognized this difference. His November 1943 report accurately predicted what would unfold over the next 18 months, but it was filed away and forgotten because the truth was inconvenient. If you found this deep dive into engineering philosophy and design decisions compelling, make sure you're subscribed. History is full of moments where the obvious truth was ignored because it contradicted comfortable beliefs. Hans Veer Lurch flew the P-47 Thunderbolt and immediately understood that it represented a superior approach to fighter design, not in terms of performance, but in terms of operations. His reward was to be ignored, while his predictions came true as the Luftwaffe was worn down by an enemy that could simply keep more aircraft flying consistently. The lesson is timeless. In sustained conflict, reliability beats peak performance. Operational availability trumps maximum capability. And design philosophy matters more than individual excellence. The P-47 wasn't the best fighter of World War II, but it might have been the best designed fighter because it was built not for air shows, test flights, or record breaking. It was built for war. And in war, the side that can keep fighting the longest usually wins.